Beginning, we thought that this Tropentag is also an opportunity to discuss topics sometimes in a controversial way, but this is an issue we would like to have at this Tropentag, and therefore we are very delighted to have a group of very renowned and really people who could say something about developing issues and especially how to overcome hunger and poverty in sub-Saharan Africa, for instance. Therefore, I'm very proud to present you the first speaker, and I spoke with Bernard von Lauer, who is now presenting the IATA here, and we are very lucky that he's here representing the IATA, and the topic written here is IATA Lead Research Partner Facilitating Agricultural Solutions in Overcoming Hunger and Poverty in Sub-Saharan Africa. From his career and home, he's a soil scientist and now working in Kenya at IATA. Thank you for being here, and the floor is yours. Mal gerade gucken. So which one was this one?
Yeah. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I was asked by my director, Dr. Sanginga, to represent the IATA. He had to go back to Nigeria for urgent business. And he also wanted me to thank the organizers to accommodate this talk and all the other IAT events, so we really do appreciate. With his permission, I've also added a subtitle to the title of the presentation, The Critical Role of Appropriate Soil Fertility and Land Use Management. This meeting is about soils and land use, and this is what I'm going to focus on. And the reason why I'm going to focus on is because in 2012, IAT revised its strategy. Over the years, we had been continuing doing a lot of breeding work, germplasm development, but the soils and agronomy work had been declining. And when the DG Sanginga came, and after some reflection and experiences, we felt that the inherent benefits of improved germplasm can never be materialized without appropriate soil fertility management. So we made a promise to the world to lift 11 million Africans out of poverty and turn 7 million hectares into sustainable land use. That's the promise we made. We also decentralized IAT because this goal requires investments in all parts of the continent. So we have 4 hubs now, each of the hubs having research infrastructure, staff in Ibadan, Nigeria, Dar es Salaam for East Africa, Kinshasa, Congo for Central Africa, and Lusaka, Zambia for Southern Africa. IAT also has 4 research areas: genetic improvement, natural resource management, social sciences, and plant health. So all the young people in this room, PhDs, MScs, if you want to do some work in any of those areas, in any part of the continent, I think you will find something at IAT. You're welcome. Going back to the topic, just let's keep on remembering, if you want to derive a livelihood from being a smallholder farmer in Africa, it's not easy. It's not easy. There's a lot of reasons why that is, but this is about soils, so I will talk about soils. First of all, the soils on any soil map that you see, the soils in Africa are always red or orange. And that's because that's how they look like in reality. They are degraded, they don't have volcanic activity, they've not had glacier or ice ages, no rejuvenation. But over time you have a forest and people start cropping. If you're not too many people, slash and burn works. You cut a piece, leave it for some time, go back. But what happens once you start doing that too long? If this is crop yield, the green line, after some time your yields start going down if you don't do anything, just low input agriculture. Your soil fertility starts going down, the brown line. What we see is that during these initial phases, the main degradation process is nutrient imbalances. You start getting nitrogen deficiency in maize systems. The other degradation processes, acidity, erosion, takes a bit longer to materialize. So once you're in this phase, the initial phases of farming, you can actually do something. You can apply those nutrients that are missing. You will create more productivity, your crop yield will go up. Higher yields means more biomass, more crop residues that you can feed to your cows, recycle, and you can reinvest in your soil fertility. When you don't do this, and you let this degradation process go on and on and on, all these other degradation processes come up, so it's going much more beyond nutrient limitations. You start having erosion because your biomass is not there, acidification, all sorts of other biological degradation, pests will come up. Once you end up in this situation, just applying your nutrients is not more sufficient. You need to first probably reinvest in soil rehabilitation, and then you will see your yields going up. And we've seen that in a lot of situations. We often refer to those situations as areas with non-responsive soil. So you apply fertilizer, nothing happens. Now, unfortunately, the quick solution here, which is applying the right amount of nutrients, in Africa is an issue. This is in Congo, East Congo. I took a bit of an extreme situation. It's not everywhere like this. 1 bag of fertilizer, these are a bit old figures, but I'm sure they've not changed a lot. 200 to 500 dollars per ton. If they arrive in Bukavu, $900 to $1,400 a ton, 5 times more. It's a lot to do with transport, but the distance from Dar es Salaam to Bukavu is as far as from Hamburg to München. Imagine the fertilizer price changes 5 times when you arrive in München. Germany would be in trouble, isn't it? Very funny, in the same place, Coca-Cola is 5 times cheaper than in Europe. And it follows the same route. So, we often use it, the Coca-Cola paradox. Why is a product 5 times cheaper than in Europe, while another product is 5 times more expensive, and it follows the same routes to get there? Anyway. So it's not easy to be a smallholder farmer, but intensification, producing more per unit of land, it has to happen. Here it has to happen because that fallow land to cut and slash and burn is no longer there. You see these maps, 2 independent databases, population density here, and here the main yield gaps, the red areas being nutrient-limited yield gaps. You don't need to do correlation analysis, isn't it? You see the areas with a lot of people or those where nutrient limitation is the major sort of constraint in terms of the yield gap. One place here is Nigeria, here, this dark place. Today in Nigeria there's 180 million people. In 35 years there will be 400 million. And the place is already quite darkly colored. So one of our colleagues I think he's in the room 2 days ago, he said this is just the tip of the iceberg. You see those pictures on television once in a while these days, isn't it? Where will this 200 extra million people go to if agriculture is not improved? There's other reasons to also intensify, and that's to save the Congo forest. Even in this forest, population is growing. We don't want to cut it down, isn't it? So it's difficult. We have to intensify. But the good thing is we've learned something over the years. Yeah? This is IITA story now. In the early days, in the 60s, 70s, IITA used a lot on fertilizer and land clearing because the Green Revolution was happening in Asia and we were going to bring it to Africa. After some years, well, it didn't all go as planned. So some clever people say, oh, we have another solution, alley cropping. Let's drop that fertilizer, let's go for green manures. In the 90s, all the work on fertilizer was stopped. Our director in those days says, don't use fertilizer in your work, because farmers don't use fertilizer in Africa. He said that. Of course he didn't know, it was not true, but he didn't know. So we moved into a lot of other alternative technologies. Very nice papers, hundreds. Uptake, adoption, no, not so much, So at the same time, around the 90s, this dual-purpose grain legumes, dual-purpose soybean, were also shown to really, do a good job in terms of getting nitrogen into the system. So in 2000, all the work on green manures and alley cropping was stopped. There was no adoption, no reason to continue. And now we are back to where we started. I'm wondering often what would have happened if we hadn't taken those side roads and if we had gone straight from here to there. Maybe if Bill Clinton would have been a soil scientist, he would have said it's fertilizer, stupid. It's not fertilizer alone, not at all. Fertilizer is part of the solution. And we usually describe this as integrated soil fertility management. You need those nutrients that nature cannot provide. You need improved germplasm. You need organic resources and recycle them and use them properly so you don't get the negative effects of fertilizer. Targeting and all the idea of all those components put in combination is, first of all, they interact with each other very often positively. Having a healthy germplasm takes up more nutrients than not, produces more organic matter. So it's all not about using fertilizer, it's about ensuring that the use efficiency of those inputs is maximized so we don't get any of the impacts that happen in other continents. That's what it is about. We've seen over the years that this integrated soil fertility management approach, if you combine your inputs, you get definitely higher yields. You also get more stable yields. You see your yield variability going down in a combined treatment. And if you manage your crop residues very well and all your other organic inputs, you see your carbon going up in time. I don't have time to go into all the details, but a lot of the evidence actually shows that this ISFM approach is actually moving towards climate smart agriculture, whatever that means. So it's difficult to be a farmer in Africa, but we have to improve his livelihoods. We've learned a lot on how to do that. Unfortunately, the enabling environment is changing. It's changing. The ministers in 2006 agreed if we don't improve nutrient inputs from 8 kilogram to something more meaningful, we are not going to do anything about rural poverty. So they agreed by 2015 we should move from 8 to 50 kilograms nutrients per hectare as fertilizer. 2015, that's today, isn't it? Then Agra was initiated. Kofi Annan made a very nice statement. He said we need a green revolution, but it has to be an Africa-specific green revolution, taking into account all the variation, heterogeneity, all the conditions that determine nutrient uptake. This is not in Brazil. Where is this? This is in Congo. The first time since independence, Congo is investing in agriculture. Before they had mines and oil and all sorts of uranium. Since 1 year they are investing in agriculture. Is this the model that they should use? I don't know. Congo has gone through quite a number of years of paternalism, so I'm not going to judge whether this is right or wrong. What we are doing in IIT is we are working with some of those initiatives and see how smallholder farmers can benefit from the agro input supply systems that are fostered by this, for the processing capacity that will be set up. So that's our job. Yara, the fertilizer company, is investing in Africa, finally. They've always been scared and afraid and said, it's too risky, all those smallholders. We are never sure if we will sell what we need. This is important news. Unfortunately, and I think Pedro Sanchez, we all know Pedro, of course, he's been summarizing it quite well into a recent paper, all the changes. He talks about mobile phone technology and so on. It's a bit, how would I say, a political paper, but it summarizes a lot of the nice developments that are happening. So Africa is changing very much. And we see that change also in the results. It's not just conditions and whatever. I've talked about Abuja. There is a recent report out written by Chris Barrett on the LSMS, the World Bank data. 10,000 households, 60,000 plots were evaluated in 6 countries. One of the things they measured is nutrient use. And what they saw is, in Malawi and Nigeria, 77 and 41% of the households use fertilizer at rates that are very close to the Abuja targets. Ethiopia is running behind but picking up very quickly. So there is that change happening. If you look at FAO, we talked about FAO statistics 2 days ago. If you look at statistics, you will not see that. But this is happening. And in Malawi, we all know the story of Malawi, that from being a food deficient country, it's actually now exporting food to Zimbabwe and Zambia and other places, with maize yield having doubled from 0.8 to 2.1 on average, due to you know, good practices, facilitating access to inputs and so on. So is our work done? No, it's not done. Because even in Malawi, the aggregated agronomic use efficiency has 14 kilogram grain of maize per kilogram of nitrogen applied. That's very low. That means a lot of the nitrogen is still not used properly. With integrated soil fertility management, I cannot explain it in detail, but doing all those right components at the right, you can get to 30, 33, 35 kilogram per kilogram. You can do that. So Malawi, very good. They've made progress. Can they still improve? Yes. And they are actually now investing in some of the alternatives, the grain, legumes, and so on, to do something about that. So how do we speed up those changes? Because that's what we need to do, isn't it? We have seen there is the enabling environment is changing, there is change being created. So how can we speed it up? How can we make it go faster? So these 400 people in Nigeria decide that it's better to stay in their country. So in IIT we are using new models for accelerating the impact of research. We are still doing our research, of course, but we are also working on new models. One is we are placing research within development. I know it sounds a bit political, but it's actually happening. And the way we are working is, this is, for instance, an initiative somewhere. So there's an NGO or whatever, a private company working with thousands of smallholders, and they are engaging in, for instance, cassava production. So what we are doing is, we are going to talk to them, and we are asking, what do you need from us? What do we as IIT need to do for you in terms of agronomy and soils work to make your own work go better? And then they tell us, well, do this, we need this, and we need that. And then, of course, you go and test it and so on. So we've done that same exercise in the context of a recent cassava agronomy initiative. If you have to start the research program on cassava agronomy, what are you going to do? Evaluate varieties, look at it could be infinite. So we went through this process, and this is what we are going to do. We will develop a fertilizer blending tool. We'll look at the tool for optimum plant harvesting for high starch content. We look at the staggered planting tool for continuous supply of roots, and so on. These are demands from those partners, and that's what this is our research program, nothing else. The second model is public-private partnerships. You have private sector people, they have their money, they have their initiatives. You have the seed sector, they have their money, they have their initiatives. We have our project, we have our money, we have our objectives. If you look at those objectives, they are all the same. We all want to improve productivity, we all want to make sure it's economic and environmentally sound. We want to all improve livelihoods of those people we are working with. So we say, let's put all our money, let's put it in the same place. You do this, we do that. It's new, these models are new, but I think they are working, and we see this. This is an example from Ethiopia in the context of N2 Africa, where we work with capacity building and dissemination partners. You see the logos, input supply, market access, processing people, and then in farmer organizations. This is happening. And then into Africa, we currently have like 25 of those PPPs all over the continent. The other thing we are doing is, sometimes you can have your PPP, but some of those inputs are missing, they are not available. I don't know who visited IIT, but this, I'm promoting IIT a little bit. This is the campus in Ibadan, 1,000 hectares, population density of 10 people per square kilometer, like the Sahel, lakes, forests, everything. And here you see that place here. There's a very small old shed. It was a bit far from everything else because it was a bit smelly. They stored fertilizer, all sorts of, nasty stuff there. This is how it looks today. Yeah, we call it the business incubation platform. This is a plant where we produce inoculants for soybean. I will not go into the details, but this is what comes out of this. This year we sold $50,000 worth of inoculants for soybean inoculation in Nigeria. Another model, this is not a football game. This is in Abuja in Nigeria. It's not a football game. It's a job interview. There was 5,000 vacancies in the immigration service in Nigeria, and over 100,000 young people applied. So they had to do it in the stadium. It was in the news because quite a number of young people died. And they are part of that pyramid here. They are in this box here. So what we are doing is, IIT has started initiatives to work with young people, graduates in history, agriculture, and work with them to make money from agriculture. These young people, they are now making money from agriculture. Some of them started with getting $150, 100 euro per month as fee. We give them 18 months. And then they have to go into their own business. Some fail, some make it, but they do seed multiplication, maize. They do processing, bread, cassava bread. They went into pig farming and now recently into fish farming. The group doing fish farming, they are earning $700 a month now, making for themselves. This is a model that's been showing creating a lot of interest, and we are going to scale this up very highly because we really believe that we have to do this. The last slide I'm having is on a soil health platform we are launching in West Africa. West Africa has been a bit devoid of networks for soils people. And in Ouagadougou in December, we are launching a soil health platform for West and Central Africa. I don't know if it will still be in Ouaga with the problems that are there, but it will take place somewhere else eventually. So you're all welcome to hear more about it, and you can write to my colleague. His email is there in case you need to know more about it. So thank you very much, and welcome in IITA. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A big applause for Bernard van Lauwer. Thank you, Bernard. Thanks again for coming here, and it was extraordinarily interesting for us to see the sub-Saharan perspective. What we will do now, I just explained the format, is we will ask for the seat, and we have a plenary discussion afterwards. There we have 30 minutes where we discuss then later, and then we are very rude now to you, but later you can ask. Then it's and we can have the joint discussion. Well, I'm personally very happy to have Carter Coleman here. Why? Because I asked him, please come over. He said, my workload is so high, I cannot come. I said, please come. You said, okay, I do it. Carter Coleman, as an investor, and I'm personally very happy, he says, yes, Stefan, we do it. We present it here and we discuss together common good models in terms of food security as one idea. Thank you very much, Carter.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. How many here are from the private sector? There's a few back there. Where's my friend Mr. Mtambo? Upawapumze. Aha. Nafurahisana kukuona leo. Okay. So, Agrica. We're a young company, started in 2005, and started our first project in Tanzania in 2008. And our mission from the get-go was to set the standard for sustainable commercial agriculture in East Africa through state-of-the-art minimum impact farming, renewable power, transformative smallholder technology, poverty reduction in areas of chronic underinvestment, and boosting food security through import displacement. This is the main road to our farm in the rainy season. You can imagine. Actually, USAID has improved it, but if we get an El Nino this year, it may go back to that. So you can imagine every input, every liter of diesel, every kilogram of fertilizer has to go in on that road, and every kilo of rice or maize has to go out on that road. So farming to begin with, the greenfield farming project, ticks all the negative criteria that scares off investors. It's long time horizon, it's capital intensive, agriculture is high risk by nature, and it produces low to modest returns. Someone investing in a new company and a new project wants a 25% return on their investment. Agriculture, if Jesus comes down from heaven, you're going to get a 10% return. And it's even harder to do it in Africa because it increases the risk, and it's more expensive because you have to be self-sufficient. So I've come from Louisiana, a Louisiana rice farmer. I also like to say farming is rocket science, and farming in Africa is like farming on Mars. I mean, you look at the road. But also, I come from Louisiana. A rice farmer in Louisiana, or from California to China, or from Argentina to Australia, has a huge variety of seeds suitable for their agroecological zone, and decades of agronomic research, and therefore pest and disease control knowledge. We don't have that in Africa. There are people here who are involved in that, but we are still years and years behind the agronomic powerhouses around the world. So a Louisiana rice farmer does not have to have his own seed trial variety research going every year, and his own research on pest and disease control. We were wiped out one year by a stem borer. No one in Tanzania could tell us what stem borer that was, which we needed to know to control it. I had to smuggle moths back to London, where I'm based, to have their genitalia photographed at the Museum of Natural History to identify the stem borer that had wiped out part of our crop. In Louisiana, where I come from, a rice farmer doesn't usually have his own dryers. It goes in a truck down a nice tarmac road to someone who dries it. Probably doesn't have his own silos, definitely doesn't have his own mill, and most assuredly is not producing his own electricity. You see the large photo there, that's our first, and I believe Africa's first, 500 kilowatt biomass gasifier. It combusts the rice husk at 800 degrees centigrade and turns it into a gas, like the gas on your stove, that runs a generator. And it saves a lot of greenhouse gas emissions from substitution of diesel, and also from the avoided methane release from the decay of the husk. So we're quite excited about that. It started operating a couple of months ago, and we're planning on building a couple of more. But all this makes farming so much more expensive than elsewhere in the world, which means you have to have very patient shareholders who are willing to wait a long time, and in all odds to put in more money than you originally asked them for to get over a lot of these hurdles. Now, Mr. Mtembo will be very familiar with a classic example of African political risk. And I would love to talk to you about this because I still don't understand it. But in January of 2013, the government of Tanzania decided to allow 120,000 tons of Asian rice exempt from the 75% common external tariff of the East African community into the country. And for some reason, and maybe you'll be able to tell me afterwards, they didn't go to the East African Community Council of Ministers and get permission to do that, like they were treaty bound to do. So two things happened. The wholesale price of rice dropped 54%, damaging our company and the livelihoods of 500,000 smallholders. 6 months later, Rwanda, Uganda, and Kenya started imposing the common external tariff on all Tanzania rice, because this duty-free rice started going into their country, and they got fed up and said, enough. So the government had effectively, sorry, sir, destroyed our domestic market and our export market. Tanzania is a rice surplus producer. And that cost us about $6 million, which meant I had to go back to our shareholders and say, I need $6 million or we're going out of business. I should have asked for a government bailout. But I love the government of Tanzania when it does the right thing, and Tanzania is a great country and has a huge amount of potential. So we've got a 5,000 hectare commercial farm, which is pretty much state of the art. Minimum impact, yes, we do use chemicals and fertilizer, and we've spent about $55 million so far, and we are still 2 years away from making our first profit. We currently, you see those circles, that photo was taken when we had 215 hectares. As of now, we have 515 hectares of overhead center pivots. By January, we'll have 1,445. It's what will bring us to profitability. You can double your yields and you can do it twice a year. And doing it this way uses half the water of flood irrigation, so it's efficient. Now what I'm most proud of, because my background actually is NGO world. I was a social entrepreneur. I started an NGO in Tanzania in 1991 called the Tanzania Forest Conservation Group that works now with 160 villages in 6 mountain ranges and conserves 3,000 square kilometers of high biodiversity rainforest through grassroots community development. And then in 2005, I became an entrepreneur. Right, so I wanted to do the same thing, but on a for-profit basis. So we were looking, everyone in our valley grows rice in the rainy season. It's too wet there to grow maize. It is their annual income and their food security. So from the day we started, we were like, what can we do to help all these smallholders? And we heard about the so-called system for rice intensification invented by a Jesuit priest in Madagascar, and we introduced a kind of rain-fed, because all the local farmers are all rain-fed, very few are irrigated. Rain-fed version of that, and it has been simply transformative. We've trained 7,403 farmer families in 10 villages within 65 kilometers of the farm, and in what we call standard rain-fed SRI. And then in the last couple of years, we've trained 3,555 of those in zero-till SRI. So basically just eliminating the annual plowing and harrowing and planting on the same grid that you used the year before. And some of these farmers are getting up to 9 tons a hectare rain-fed. That's like a world-class irrigated yield. You see an extension officer there in his canoe on his way to work in the rainy season. And the gentleman there is Lawrence Msigwa. He averages 7.5 tons a hectare every year, rain-fed. So the remaining challenge for them to maintain their productivity and to increase the area that they're farming is their lack of credit. So from my mind, or what I've seen, across Africa, farmers are trapped in poverty because they have no credit. So invariably, well before harvest, they will pre-sell. In every little village, there's a guy there. You need money, your kid is sick, you have to pay school fees, you don't have any food in the house. There's a guy in that village who will say, okay, here's 10,000 Tanzania shillings. Now sign this piece of paper that doesn't say, I owe you 10,000 shillings. It says, I borrowed from you 10 debes, which is a 5-gallon bucket of paddy, unmilled rice. And at that point, that farmer just pre-sold a portion of his crop at about 1/10 of its value at harvest. And that happens in every crop again and again and again. So what the farmers really need, from my perspective, is credit enough for their inputs and a bit of cash to make it through the season without pre-selling their crop. And that's what we've been working on, and that's what we have yet to succeed in establishing. We had 2 years ago, a group of farmers, and our farm can't do it, right? I mean, we're already losing money, and we definitely, even if we weren't, we wouldn't have the working capital available to provide all that credit to all those farmers. A bank has to step up, a bank or a microfinance institution. So a microfinance institution 2 years ago had 191 farmers collectively decide to default. Our company, we give them a paddy purchase agreement. We tell them and we tell the bank, we'll pick up their paddy and we'll turn around and pay the bank. And above that, we'll pay for their surplus at an agreed price. And 191 farmers just decided, I think advised by some so-called human rights organization that told them it was against their human rights to repay their loans. And it's sort of like Greece. Do you vote to repay? No, I vote not to repay. So they all voted not to repay, and that set back our ability to get other farmers credit considerably. But I'm very confident that in the coming season, in November, the 1,000 best farmers, who all average above 5 tons a hectare, will get loans for the first time in 2 years. We've got them a 60% loan guarantee from a Danish organization. So I hope that if I'm ever invited back to speak, I'll say, yes, we fixed the credit problem for our smallholders. We're also, and I think any large agricultural investment should be expected to do this, like be a really good neighbor because you want your neighbors to like you and cooperate with you. So we've got a health center for our 275 employees that last year there were 11,000 non-staff visits and 7,000 non-staff admissions. We're basically providing subsidized health care, about $60,000 a year in subsidized health care. Now, how do we grab our land? I like to say, our land grab. The so-called land grab supposedly happening across Africa. I don't see it. For all the reasons that I explained, it's so expensive to develop a project. I think the land grab thing is totally overblown. But how we grabbed our land, I looked around Tanzania for about a year and a half and found a defunct government farm owned by the Rufiji Basin Development Authority that had originally been a joint venture between the government of North Korea and the government of Tanzania. So the North Koreans had come in the late 80s, cleared 5,818 hectares, put in some roads and drains, farmed a couple of crops rain-fed, never put in the most expensive component of any project, the irrigation system, ran out of money after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when in 1991, nobody knows how many, 1 million North Koreans starved to death because the country is investing in nuclear technology rather than agriculture. The North Koreans went home. I remember that because I was there working for my rainforest NGO. The North Korean ambassador got caught with a container full of ivory. Do you remember that, Mr. Mtombo? Now the rumor is every time the Chinese premier flies to Tanzania, he flies back with an Airbus full of ivory. I've heard that from reputable people, don't know if that's true. Anyway, we signed a contract to buy the farm, and then we did 6 weeks with an external consultant, participatory mapping surveys, where we mapped every structure, every little shamba farming plot, every fruit tree, had a socioeconomic questionnaire for everyone who was either living on the titled area or walking in from a nearby village and farming on it. And we ended up, you see the yellow area, so the red area, it was just too heavily populated. There was no way you were going to try to resettle the people there. It was on our title deed, it was legally ours, but we just said, you stay. And these 20 families in the yellow area, you have lots of unused land in that red area, you take them, we'll build them houses. And 82 families in the light gray border, we'll move them down to the green area, we'll build them houses. Everyone who's farming, even though most of them were farming, say, half an acre or an acre, everyone who's farming gets a minimum of 3 acres, which they can find, which we will pay for, clear, plow, harrow, prepare to plant, and give you some good seeds. And fruit trees will pay government cash compensation for fruit trees. We set up a grievance committee chaired by the village and with representatives. We used to call them squatters. We now call them project affected persons. And it was a 2-year process. And I don't think we missed anyone. And I think everyone was treated very fairly. You see on the top of a dirty, shallow well, which is how most of them are getting their water. They now have pump boreholes. You see a typical thatched house. They got concrete houses with tin roofs on raised concrete bases with separate toilet facilities in the back. And we also built a school and teachers' houses. So, and we spent $623,000 doing this. And we have been attacked by Greenpeace Africa and this other activist organization who accuse us of taking away people's land and not paying fair compensation and have ignored all our evidence. 82% of the farmers got a larger area cleared, plowed, and prepared to plant than they were farming before. So I guess another challenge, since this is supposed to be about challenges, is you bend over backwards and you will still be attacked by an ideological, fundamentally anti-capitalist activist who believes that all agricultural investment is inherently evil by nature, is the only thing I can figure out. That's it.
Thank you. This was so important that you're here, Mr. Corman. Thank you very much for this. We will have a discussion later. You come to the plenary then, And it's so important to break this ice and to show the other perspective. With this, you can exactly protect from these attacks. Thanks a lot. Okay, this is now the moment for Miguel Altieri. He's a world traveler in terms of agroecology. I welcome you. A big applause for you. And it's a pleasure that you're here and that you could come over. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hello. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to Tropentag. The first thing before we start tackling the root causes of hunger and food insecurity is that we need to debunk the myths that the problems of hunger and food security are due to overpopulation, that there's enough food, there is not enough food to feed the world, that nature is blamed for famine because of the droughts, that the Green Revolution is the answer, and that free trade can end hunger. Actually, the situation that you were talking about in Tanzania happens all the time with countries that signed free trade agreements with the United States. So there is enough food out there. The problem is not lack of production, it's poverty, it's lack of access to land, and also in 78% of all the undernourished children under 5 living in the third world inhabit countries with surpluses, many of them net exporters. But there's another perspective which has to do with the connection between the north and what goes on down in the south. 20% of the world's population consumes resources, including food, at a rate that robs the poor nations and future generations of what they need to survive. As a matter of fact, Europe has 35 million hectares of ghost acres that need to be providing the food that, of the demanding diets of the people here in Europe. And here's just one example. In the food that comes to the United Kingdom comes from many, many countries, traveling thousands of kilometers, and actually a lot of that land is devoted to export food instead of feeding the local populations. And obviously, there is another issue which is totally unacceptable, that we're throwing away in the United States and in Europe and in China enough food that could be, actually, if it was able to be transported, it would be feeding Africa immediately without the need of kinds of projects that were described before. And on top of that, because of the demands and the mandates that are happening in Europe and the United States in order to feed cars instead of people, we are going to be actually increasing the number of hungry people in the world with the demand of biofuels, because 25 gallons of ethanol uses the maize needed to feed 1 person per year. On top of that, we have food empires, which are multinational corporations that are controlling the food system, that determine what the producers are going to produce, how much they're going to produce, for whom, with what kind of technologies, and because they are also stratified vertically, they determine through the big supermarkets what people are going to eat, what price they're going to pay for that food, and the quality of that food. So here you can see that many of these corporations are actually speculating with the price of the major important grains like rice and wheat and maize, and you can see how the price of the food went up, not just because of normal market conditions, but actually because of speculation, subjecting, as you can see here, a reduction in the amount of food that poor people are eating because of this speculation. So, the industrial model of agriculture, which occupies 70% of the agricultural land of the 1.5 billion hectares, only produces 30% of the food. They're interested in producing biomass, and uses 70 to 80% of the water of the land, 70% of the water, 80% of the fossil fuels, and produces on top of that 20 to 30% of the global greenhouse gases that are producing climate change. So these monocultures that are dominating the landscapes of the world are actually, they have very temporary economic advantages, but in the long term, they're not an ecological optimum. And on top of that, they're very impressively uniform genetically and ecologically. And this drastic narrowing of the cultivated plant diversity in dominant monoculture is putting the world's food production in great peril. Because of the tremendous vulnerability of the system, because of their homogeneity, they require a lot of pesticides. And you can see that Europe is leading the way in terms of the use of pesticides. And the cost the environmental cost of pesticides and other of the conventional technologies in the United States is about $300 per hectare, which is not accounted into the neoliberal economic analysis, but are externalities that society pays at large in the form of water contamination, biodiversity loss, human health. There's about $8 billion in the United States, mostly immigrants that come and do the farm work that are the ones that are suffering, disappearing wetlands, soil losses, etc. And in California, where we have now the 4th year of a drought, we already are 400,000 acres of land are out of production at a cost of about $1.5 billion because of the vulnerability of these monoculture systems. And then the innovations continue and along the same lines that we need to enhance production because we need to catch up, with human population growth, which is a totally Malthusian view. That we have 200 million hectares of transgenic crops, and there's not 1 hectare out there, and I would challenge anybody to show me the country that is feeding one of the 1 billion people that are hungry in the world right now, because the only 2 potentially edible crops that are transgenic in the world right now is corn and soybean. Half of it goes to feed cattle in Europe and in China, and the other half goes to feed animals. So there's not 1 hectare of transgenic crops, despite the promises that they're going to be crucial to feed the world. Actually, the message is that you Europeans are selfish because you are denying the Africans of the possibility of feeding themselves through transgenesis. And the other thing that I'm very impressed is the fact that we should have some African people here talking instead of us, because since they also have the capacity to define their own destiny. So why don't we just stop kidding ourselves and have more meetings about the same thing, 6 decades of billions of dollars invested in the CIR and many other institutions of enormous waves of agricultural science and innovation have not solved the problem. Why would we have 1 billion people hungry? Why we would have all the problems that we have in agriculture if the agricultural revolutions had worked? The social and ecological toll has been equally enormous and have outstripped the benefits. Focus instead on the root causes of rural problems and hunger, and let's abandon agricultural models incapable of ensuring respect for the poor and the environment. So, the greening of the Green Revolution will not work. Masking the problems of industrial agriculture, concealing the symptoms, simply making efforts to reduce the impacts of industrial agriculture through the names of climate smart, sustainable intensification is more of the same, exactly. And this business as usual, as the IASTD already established, it doesn't work. So we need a new agriculture, but this agriculture has to have an ethics. The new paradigm to feed the world requires an agroecological approach, but also has to have a social perspective which takes into account the fundamental right of the poor to food and land. That's fundamental to solve the problem. It also must challenge the right of private property as absolute and unviable and violable, and stress the social purpose of all forms of private property. Actually, in Latin America, there's a law that says that the social function of the land has to be producing food, and for that it has to be accessible to the small farmers. And also we need an international collaboration going on in which we respect the right of communities and countries to define their own agriculture without interference from the outside. Let's stop the colonialism and the imperialism that is going on in science, that we know the best in the north and the south is just subject to our agendas. So, the features of the future agriculture has to be totally decoupled from fossil fuel dependence, agroecosystems of low environmental impact. They have to be resilient to climate change, multifunctional, not only producing food and of good quality and healthy, but also social and ecological and cultural services, and it has to provide the foundations for local food systems. We cannot afford to have cities of 10 million people where they have to import 6,000 tons of food per day that travels about 1,000 kilometers. That's totally unsustainable. We need to promote local food systems. And for that, what we need is an agriculture of high diversity, of high productivity, and high efficiency. And you obtain that by creating systems that are highly biodiverse, that have high rates of recycling and very low external inputs. But that doesn't mean that the systems are not working. So who are the ones that are close to this? Are the peasants. In the world, we have 1.5 billion small farmers in about 300 million farms. with a size of less than 2 hectares, and they have in their hands 1.9 million crop varieties that are the treasure for the future of agriculture. The Green Revolution only came up with 7,000 varieties, despite all the funding that went on from the World Bank and so on. So the peasants produce 50 to 70% of the food, but using 20 to 30% of the land, 30% of the water, and 20% of the fossil fuels in agriculture. So it's a very efficient agriculture, and if we really wanted to solve the problem, why don't we give the farmers 60% of the land? How do these systems work without external inputs? Because some people quote that low input agriculture is not productive, but that doesn't mean that we're not talking about ecological inputs into the system. So for example, rice paddies, traditional system that you find in Southeast Asia and China, they have many, many crops in addition to rice, perennial crops, etc. But also they have fish and other animals, and these fish play a very important function because they can also control weeds, they control insects, and also you can sponsor the growth of azolla, which fixes about 50 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. Then you bring ducks, and at the end you end up with a biodiversity that is functional, that is interacting, which is sponsoring the function of the system. The soil fertility, the biological control, the productivity comes from the assemblage of this biodiversity. Let's look at the coffee systems, for example, in Latin America. This forest that you see there is a coffee system where there's about 319 species of plants. The farmer has to be making decisions how to manage this diversity. Here you can see when you're going to prune, when you're going to harvest, and so on. And then there is a tendency to try to intensify the systems by taking out the shade. When you take out the shade, you lose a lot of diversity, but you also ecological services. For example, this very complex system that I don't have time to talk about of ants and fungi and others that are interacting, controlling one of the major pests in like the scales and the coffee rust in Central America. And on top of that, when you reduce the shade, you increase the evapotranspiration, so the system becomes very vulnerable to climate change. So these systems of productivity, I haven't been told that I have 5 minutes yet. How much do I have? Because you're coming close here. So, do you receive orders to kick me out? Okay. So the milpa, for example, which is a traditional system in Mesoamerica with corn, beans, and squash are grown together, actually is interesting because when the Americans came with the Green Revolution to Mexico, they were only producing 2.3 tons to about 4 tons of maize, when the milpas were producing between 5 and 6. So who was going to teach to grow corn to whom? And in addition to that, because the milpas produce other things, 1 hectare could produce enough food to feed 15 to 20 persons per year. And when you increase the diversity of crops, you also increase, obviously, the diversity of vitamins and nutrients and minerals and so on. The genetic diversity of the systems is crucial because this diversity provides adaptability to diseases, to climate change. For example, the maíz de cajete is a system in the northern part, in the Oaxaca region of Mexico, where farmers have this variety that they plant at a certain depth, and then this plant is able to germinate without water. But you need the traditional knowledge, not only the genetic knowledge, the genetic capability of the seed, but the knowledge of when to plant, at what depth, with what kind of soil moisture. So there's a very important link between cultural diversity and genetic diversity. So agroecology, what it does, it recovers the knowledge of traditional farmers, uses some elements of modern technology, and creating a dialogue of wisdom derives the principles that are going to govern the sustainability and the resiliency of the new systems of the future. And one example of this, the application, direct application in reality, is Cuba. You know what, in Cuba, what happened in 1989, there was a drop of imports of petroleum fertilizers, pesticides, and animal feeds in about 70%. Imagine that tomorrow we turn off the entrance of petroleum and fertilizers and pesticides in Germany, what would happen? Well, the Cubans, interestingly enough, the peasants, the small farmers, this was their contribution before the special period, before when there was petroleum and fertilizers, and after, when there was no pesticides, no fertilizers, then they stepped up with their systems. There are agroecological systems that are using different types of diversification strategies and organic management. And then here's one example of one farmer that went into an area of 10 hectares and redesigned the farm where you have a complex system of hedgerows, of multiple use trees, crop rotations with pastures and crops and agroforestry systems and so on. And this system actually he's able to produce enough protein in 1 hectare to feed 34 people. That means 340 people in total, with an energy efficiency of 30. He puts 1 kilocalorie and gets 30 back. Most of the industrial agriculture has an energy efficiency of about 1.5. So in top of that, the systems, because of the network of diversity and hedgerows, are very, very resilient to climate change, especially hurricanes. So, for example, after the Hurricane Ike, average loss in diversified farm was 50% compared to 90 to 100% in monocultures. But most importantly, the recovery of the farms after was also accelerated. So here you can see how a farm can recover right after the hurricane in about 2 months. Then you have systems of pastures that were promoted in Latin America for cattle ranching. And these systems work very well with high-yielding varieties if you have nitrogen and water, but that's not the reality anymore. And here you can see that leads to drought and that leads to the death of cattle, except some of these systems, like, for example, silvopastoral systems, which, because of their conditions, the organic matter content of the soil and the microclimate created by the silvopastoral system, they resist the drought. And you can see here, for example, in one of the farms called El Atico, in the valley of Cauca, you can see the productivity of milk that maintains its productivity in a stable way, despite the fluctuations in rain that you see due to the Niño, Niña, et cetera, et cetera. So the agro-ecosystem resiliency is very connected to vegetational diversity, the landscape matrix, and the soil and water management, which are all within the scope of farmers, and they don't require external inputs in order for you to design these kind of resilient systems. I'm going to jump a couple of things here. Now, how does this technology or this knowledge, this innovation moves? It's not because there is an extension service or there is some institution that is going to promote this. It's done through Campesino Campesino. Campesino Campesino is a social movement, actually, and a way in which farmers share information in a horizontal way. So here you can see what happened in Cuba. Right after the collapse of the Soviet bloc, there were only 216 farmers using agroecology. Today, there's more than 130,000 that are doing it, not because the government had an extension service or not because external international aid came, but because of the farmers started promoting this between them. So this works with leaders, that are promoters, we call them, promotores, that work and teach the other members of the community very simple techniques. And on top of that, many farmers are starting to decide to stay in their land. But because what is the future of these farmers, for example, in Mexico? To go and work in the United States and be exploited as farm workers. So they stay, but in order to stay, they have to restore the landscape. And you can see here these farmers restoring the landscape with reforestation, with soil conservation practices, with water harvesting, and all these techniques which allows them to stay and also to reintroduce crops such as amaranthus, which has a very high content of protein in their seed, into their systems. Now, social movements, especially the Via Campesina and others, have adopted agroecology because it's the main technological flag of their food sovereignty. They don't talk about food security, they talk about food sovereignty. Food sovereignty means that there has to be access to land, water, and seeds. Social movements have to press the governments to provide the credit because that's their social responsibility, also the research and the extension and so on. And why is agroecology compatible with social movements? Because it's participatory, uses local resources, respects traditional knowledge, and uses traditional knowledge, and optimizes and revitalizes peasant farms instead of transforming them. And because of the pressure of social movements in many countries of Latin America, there's now laws, and within the Constitution, there is the word about the promotion of agroecology and food sovereignty. So, for example, Brazil has a national law of agroecology with about $3 billion a year in terms of budget. And you can see that this program, one of the aspects of this law, is called the program of acquisition of food locally. You can see that the family farms whose main buyer is the government, they make more money than if they go through the intermediaries. And the government buys up to 30% of the production of small farmers because that goes to the social markets, which are the schools and the hospitals that are benefited. So, the Via Campesina, which is the largest peasant movement in the world, and many small farmer organizations are seeing agroecology as a key form of resistance to an economic system that puts profit before life. They say that agroecology implies putting the control of seeds, biodiversity, land and territories, waters, knowledge, etc., in the hands of those who feed the people, which are the small farmers. And they are creating territories that are autonomous. And the idea then is to bypass this top-down corporate control food system by creating a bypass in which autonomous territories, peasants producing in very close relation with consumers are going to determine a new system that is going to be alternative and that is going to ensure the food sovereignty of the poor people in the third world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So, we start with the first, how many we allow? 4 questions. Okay. At the end, there are 3, 4. Can you, yes, okay. 5. Do we have more micros? Otherwise, I will also jump. Yes.
I am Imad Mahjoub from Sudan. Thank you for Professor Bernard for his very good and clear presentation. But I would like to give a comments or some questions. There is so many research work done in the world, and particularly in my country, Sudan. But there is a most disciplines are lost and have not been taken a priorities. This is the extension field. I'm asking what you did not mention the extension in your presentation, because the research work should be go to the farmers and go to feedback to the researchers and after go to decision maker. Thank you a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The second question, we will collect some questions now as a bunch.
Lydia Nakayenza, my name. My comments are addressed to the gentleman from Agrica in Tanzania. You spoke about helping farmers access credit. How about teaching them how to save? I mean, like, I come from Eastern Uganda, and we're coffee growers. And one of the models that has worked for our farmers of coffee is to have a savings and credit scheme going on. It's been going on since like the 60s. And that money has been invested in various things so that some of the money that is paid to them as surplus at the harvest time is used to set up things that can generate more income and just to go away from finding a bank for short-term solutions.
Okay. Mr. Coleman? Yeah? Okay. Then the third question. Yes, there's one here at the side. I can run. Okay. Please ask.
Thank you. I'm Suryo Wiono from Bogor Agricultural University, Indonesia. I would like to ask Professor Altieri, that's in your mind, which one is the promising for the future? This smallholder family-based food production system, or agro-industrial based production system? Because also in Indonesia and other countries also, this is a really strong debate on this. What is the promising for the future production system that will support the sufficiency of for food? Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's one more question here. I will run.
Yeah, I would ask a little controversial question. Is that one of the slides, I can't remember which person it was, wrote third world countries. You know, to be very frank with you, the countries where we come from, they are rich in resources. Natural resources are very rich. But people also have home gardening, and we are very capable of agricultural production, even through traditional knowledge. But the key element that is ruining much of this consumerism is through advertising, and also advertising for pesticides. So, you know, advertising in the media, I believe that most of the junk food industries, they are spending huge amounts of money advertising for the young generation to ensure that their products will be bought. I just want your ideas on that.
Thank you very much. And Joyce?
Thank you very much. I'm Joyce Kinabo from Tanzania, and thank you for the presentations. My question first, it's not a question actually, it's a comment on this credit aspect. We have like social security funds or whatever that are used to pay for people who are not producing simply because they are too poor. Could we turn around that to include farmers to be given such support during the time when they're constrained in terms of cash, so that they come and repay when they harvest, instead of using banks or using other schemes that may tend to exploit farmers? But again, from all the presentations, I didn't hear anything about governance, which is a big issue in terms of all what we are trying to say here. How can we now put in an aspect of governance in all the aspects that we are trying to because in Africa, that can be a huge challenge in trying to address all the things that we want to address. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Yes. Yeah? No. Okay. Good. Then we will have the first bunch of questions, and I think also the government questions is maybe to all of you. Okay. Okay. Please go ahead. Maybe we can do it in a row. Yeah.
The first question was from the gentleman from Sudan. If I understood it well, it was about extension and, lack of it and capacity and so on. I think these days, and I agree with you, sir. And there is one thing I agree with Dr. Altieri, one thing only, that there is local knowledge, and farmers have been farming on their land, they know their land. But there's also a lot of new technology coming in, which they have no experience with. We've talked about agro inputs, we've talked about alternative ways to produce, and there is where it's really important. Extension Service, certainly, they have a role to play. IIT has decided to set up a deputy directorial generate for capacity development, because we know it is a very, very important component. Fortunately, in Africa, there's also a lot of new technology to disseminate knowledge, using mobile phone technology, using all sorts of alternatives, internet. We met a young Ugandan farmer, a lady farmer in the bush 1 year ago. And somebody, who never had been in Africa, probably like Dr. Altieri, asked, "Do you have a phone?" And she says, "Yes, here it is." And he asked, "What do you use your phone for?" She said, "WhatsApp." So things are changing. So in terms of governance, I totally agree with you, madam. And I think I've shown those figures from the SLMS data set. The only places where these changes are generated is where the government is actively investing in all those services you've talked about. Ethiopia, Malawi, Nigeria. 3 years ago, when the oil price was good, the budget of the Ministry in Agriculture in Nigeria was as high as the whole of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for one country, and this has got an impact. We are very happy that the ex-Minister of Agriculture of Nigeria is now President of the African Development Bank, and he has put agriculture as one of the first priorities, away from the traditional roads and energy sector. Thank you.
Yes. Mr. Coleman.
Okay, to answer my sisters from Uganda and Tanzania about credit, I think the operative word there with the coffee credit in Uganda is the SACCOs, the savings and credit organizations that are started by the farmers, were started in the 1960s. And so they've built up. I'm sure they didn't have a lot of capital in the beginning. We are encouraging the establishment of SACCOs in our area. We've looked around Tanzania, and we've only found one in the whole country that seems to have been successfully established and provide the seasonal credit that the farmers need. But I do think that is one way to solve it. And then the Agricultural Bank of Tanzania that's been recently established by the government, if it's able to get funded, I think it's got a mandate to get credit to smallholder farmers. So I hope that it's able to do that. From what I've heard about all the National Social Security Pension Fund and the government pension funds, is they've been raided by the government. It's an example of terrible governance. And people aren't actually getting their pension payments. So I don't know if currently they have the capital to provide smallholder farmers with finance. Governance is a giant issue. I mean, I was teasing my friend Mtembo there about what happened to us in 2013, and that is a governance issue. There's ongoing rice smuggling in Tanzania. Two big politically connected traders are bringing in transit rice for the Congo and dumping it. And Zanzibar is like, is there anyone here from Zanzibar? It's like an island of smugglers. These guys, they bring in all this stuff duty free, and then it goes by dhow to what they call the pirate ports. That's not my expression. The pirate ports across Tanzania. And actually, we've been fighting this, and the Rice Council of Tanzania has been fighting this for a while, and it looks like the government is actually going to start taking action against this transit rice being dumped and the Zanzibar connection. So I think all our efforts will fail unless there is an improvement in governance. And what I always say when I'm asked about this, governments are not monolithic. The government of Tanzania has a lot of people in it who want to do the right thing. And like other African governments, they're undermined. The guys in the government who want to do the right thing are undermined by these shadowy cabals in the background who are making money out of all this stuff. So governance and corruption, huge issue in Africa. And then this farmer-to-farmer extension. We know in our smallholder project of at least 500 farmers who have adopted this system for rice intensification, which was originally developed by the Jesuit priest to be organic, by the way. And I've got nothing. I believe in the agroecological vision, turn Africa into 100 million organic farmers. I think that's great. If someone came to us and said, let's try that with some of your smallholders, I would welcome them. I just think that it won't solve Africa's food security issues in the short term. I think it should be one of different strategies being tried. Thank you.
Just a comment. Today we have 500 million organic farmers in Africa.
Okay.
Well, first of all, it's interesting to see that after 50 years of research, or I don't know, in your graph, IATA came to the same old thing, fertilizers and genotypes, which makes farmers dependent, because you put the price of fertilizer. How many poor farmers can afford those fertilizers? And the fact that, you know, if you look at, for example, the CGIAR, 1% of the budget is going into agroecology or organic farming research, true organic farming research. So obviously you're going to have Green Revolution products out of the research, because that's what the agenda is. So, and then in terms of governance, I think that I don't have much hope about what the governments can do, although at the local level in Latin America, for example, we have municipalities which have a lot of power, because many of the mayors of those territories are farmers that were elected by the local farmers to promote a true agenda that is going to solve the problems of the rural communities. And many times when governments provide credit, for example, for farmers, is to basically follow the same, is subject to conditioning, that you need to use fertilizers and you need to use chemicals. For example, you were saying the farmers that make more than 5 tons of rice will get credit. What about the other ones? So we need to come up with different approaches, and this is what the farmer-to-farmer networks do, that don't require credit for the innovations to move, and these are innovations that are born within the communities. So social movements are very, very important in Latin America. I don't know in Africa and in Asia in determining the direction of research. Actually, the Via Campesina has its own universities called the IALAs, the Institutes of Agroecology, because the official universities are not giving the response that they need. So they're creating their own institutions. So things are moving in many ways also. Not everything dependent on the private sector, not everything dependent on the local governments or the national governments, but social movements are taking their own directions to solve their own problems, because the solutions that will never come from the top. All the solutions come bottom up.
Okay. Thank you very much. Is there one left? No. I think it's really about, you talk a lot about the feasibility of approaches, no? And you have different perspectives in the midterm and long term. We have now another bunch of questions. Please. Yes, there are a lot of people right now. It's getting more triggering, this discussion.
Thank you very much for this interesting discussions. My question is actually, when we're looking at this, the discourse of the green and agroecology, but the multinational companies and supermarket channels also already capture that the idea of these green agroecology, small scale farmers for their channels. When you're looking at the last Expo 2015, what going on in Milano, this so-called junky food like a McDonald's, they are also taking, we are also supporting for small scale farmers. We are buying directly from the farm. So I mean, this is kind of like the fear, because these multinational companies and these supermarket channels or the junky food international organization, they try to capture developing green discourses and trying to take in this agroecology movement for their business purposes. So how we combat such a reverse revolution to understanding these kind of like issues?
Mm-hmm. For whom is the question? For everyone? Okay, from Miguel. Okay, there are 2 other, 3, 4 other. Okay, we collect them and then please go ahead. Sorry, there's also one. I'm sorry. Because, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I have a question. I guess it's directed mostly at Mr. Ben Laue, when I've said that right. It's about intellectual sovereignty. It was touched on by 2 of our other speakers. So it's not only important to share information while we're conducting research now, but I'm wondering if the IITA is doing anything about bringing home information that was collected perhaps in the more colonialistic eras. It was touched on by both of our other speakers. There were obviously moths that were found in Tanzania, yet they were kept in the UK. This is a common problem for colonies. So, yeah.
Okay, good. So, the third question here, yes?
Yeah, we are speaking about food security.
Yes.
And I would like to know which kind of security. What's your perspective of security? What kind of security? Security to whom? For us? For you? For all? Or what's security for you?
Yes, it's a perspective. It's at a global level. Is it at a local level? Different scales. Yeah. Okay. And what is the target group? Okay. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, my question goes to the presenter who presented on his NGO from Tanzania. I think that was an interesting presentation.
Mr. Coleman.
Yes, that have been sent across the world. But I think that I need some few clarifications from his presentation. First thing, he showed a picture leading to probably his farm. That was the road to a farm. I don't know if that particular road was leading to his farm or to a state farm, because I believe that if that was his farm, then probably he had the responsibility maybe to get it to be led to his farm. Then my next question is, I want him to explain further what he meant by farming in Africa is like farming on the moon. Is it in the Tanzanian context with him in perspective, or global Africa. Thank you very much.
Okay, yes? Okay, good. Do you want? Okay. Mr. Mumtambo, now you have the word because you were several times.
Thanks a lot. My name is Mtambo. Kat had been referring to. 5 months ago, I was the director for food security and nutrition in Tanzania. And that's why Kata is always mentioning me, because I was responsible for any importation and exportation of food in the country. I just want to make some clarification so that you people here, when you go out, don't think that Tanzania is not a country to invest. That's why Kata is still there. He's a good investor, actually. I commend Kata for his investment. He's one of the greatest investors in the country. And actually has done a lot to the outgrowers. Initially, before his coming, people were producing 1.5 tons of rice per hectare. But with his knowledge and the input that he's giving to the farmers, to date, those people are producing more than what Kata is producing in his plantation. They have gone up to 8 tons per hectare. So I commend Kata for that, because now, as he has shown in his slides, people are now, the outcome we are seeing is people have good houses and have even expanded farms in their area. Kata mentioned about the importation of rice in Tanzania in 2013, and I was very much responsible for that. Actually, what happened was just a communication gap. There was a breakdown of communication between the private and the public. Usually in Tanzania, we have some surveys where we have to know how much the country has produced and the production and the requirement. It's true that in that year we had extra rice by 366,000 rice. But the Tanzanian rice is very palatable, and it is normally exported outside the country very quickly. By the time we decided to import rice, and actually it was not 120 kata, it was 60. Initially we had recommended 120, but we said we'll go by bunches, and we started with 60. The point is, Kata had some 14,000 metric tons of paddy in Uganda, I think so. And actually the consumption of rice in country is almost 2,000 metric tons per day. So when I'm talking of information breakdown, is that we had the information from the public, but we didn't have the information from the private people. And that's why to date, we decided to have a consolidation data between private and public, so that before we do anything in terms of food importation, we need to consult one another. So Tanzania is not a bad country as he already said, that Tanzania is one of the good countries that people can just come and invest. And for this, I'm taking this opportunity to welcome you others to come and invest in Tanzania. That is why Kata is still in Tanzania and is still a good investor. Thank you so much. I just want to thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mumtambo. We are very short in time, and thank you very much for this comment. It was a very good clarification. We have to answer the questions before. Do you have them in mind still? Yeah? Okay. Do it, because we are very short in time. We have then also to finish, to wind up.
My friend from Nigeria, that road is the main public road from a district capital running 120 kilometers south, servicing probably 150,000 smallholder rice growers. So it's not the road, it's public responsibility. I apologize for my joke, farming in Africa is like farming on Mars. But sometimes in Tanzania, when we're struggling to get our inputs down that road, that's what I feel like. And also I do think there is this enormous knowledge gap between the agricultural powerhouses of the world and Africa. Maybe in Nigeria it's not as bad. But really, East Africa, I know, needs to go a long, long way to catch up. The moths, I took moths from Tanzania to the Museum of Natural History in London to have them examined, to have them identified. It wasn't that they were stolen from Tanzania 100 years ago or something. I didn't really understand your question. But and again, that's the knowledge gap. Had I been in Louisiana, there would have been a Louisiana State University Rice Research Station down the road that could have actually, Extension Service officer would have come to our farm and said, aha, you have stem borer of this particular species. So that's my answer to the moth question. I can't remember anything else directed at me. Except my friend in Tambo, tupo pamoja mzee. Karibu Tanzania. I hope that us having gone forward will make your life easier.
Thank you.
Maybe I will comment on the food security,
Okay.
although I'm not, I think there was a hidden...
Food security, can I just say that?
No.
To me, food security in an African context is having enough to eat, to buy medicine, and to send your kids to school. That would be baseline food security to me in an African context.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, yeah, I agree. One thing, you know, in the institute that I've been working, we've been changing the way we are doing business quite a bit over the years. I started working in a non-station. We started doing things that were not relevant to farmers, like alley cropping. But we didn't know, because we thought the solution would be derived on station and then we'll move to farming communities. It all happened, nothing happened. So we started going into farming communities. And we saw, wow, these people, they are actually doing something. They have an idea of what they want to do and so on. We started answering to the demands they have. And it was not alley cropping. It was something they can immediately get something back from, food security. They're not ready to wait for 3 years before you can eat. You need to eat tomorrow. The other thing we also understood took some time, but if you go into a village, everyone looks poor, you know, everybody lives in the sort of photos you've shown and so on. But you start investigating. And there's a huge diversity of poverty profiles in the same village, from the people who are really ready to step up and go into 5 tons, to the people who don't even have 1,000 meters of land, who will never be food secure, even if they get 6 tons per hectare. So the sort of question we are still struggling with today is, if you go with a big development, we are now getting, you know, those large investments and so on, where you work with 100,000 families or something, for instance. If you start engaging, how do you make sure that you target all those people, that you don't target a fraction that will be better off at the cost of the other people who are already poor? These are complicated issues, and I don't have an answer. Yeah. It's just that we are now trying to really understand how that works, and if we can also offer something for those people who are desperate. That woman in Congo with 6 children,
yes,
having a small plot of land, 1 kilo of beans. What can we do?
Thank you. And the last answer from Miguel.
Well, I was distinguishing my talk between food security and food sovereignty, because a country can be food secure because it has the money to buy the food, and food sovereign means that you have to have, in addition to the access to food, access to land, and for that you have to have land reform so that the peasants can produce the food. And they are the ones that are producing the food right now, as I showed in my statistics. An issue that is very important, you can apply agroecology in your farm. You don't have to do it chemically, because that would reduce the number of people that would go to your clinic, actually. Yeah, and the pesticide poisoning also that the farmers so you can do agroecology at the large scale. You can apply the systems, and I can show you systems in Argentina of 3,000 hectares that are applying agroecology. So as a social entrepreneur, and the kind of work that you're doing, it would be fantastic for your farm to become a model agroecological farm. And the reason why you have rice pests is because you have monocultures. If you had diversity and natural enemies, then your system would be totally self-sufficient. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Mr. Coleman will invite now Miguel Altieri to the farm, and then you chat a little bit. In any case, I thank you very much